Warning, the following video has flashing lights and also includes content that may be deemed inappropriate for some viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. William White, yes, a member of the North American Dogman Project science team, has once again found his way into the Fox Den during this spooky season for another episode of Midnight Lycanthropy here on LordeStarfox Radio. I am really hungry though, so please excuse me for a second. Absolutely delicious. And now that William has released my shackles and set me free, it is once again time for the Midnight Society to take a walk into the darkness.
Blood, cracks, shadows morph, fangs pierce, bleeds reborn, fury rise, health ignites, burdens raise, endless nights.
I looked into the eyes of this dog man. There was nothing. This thing was an apex predator.
Milk road, cracks, shadows morph, fangs pierce, beast reborn, fury rise, endless nights.
My creatures of the night, yes, welcome back to another episode of Midnight Lycanthropy here on LordeStarfox Radio. Yes, the stomping ground and the home of the Midnight Society. We have William White, part of the science team and also the official geologist of the North American Dogman Project, sitting down with us. It is once again time to nerd out and learn. So let's get ready. How you doing tonight, man?
Hey, I'm doing pretty good. How are you?
Been busy like always, and got a chance to kick it with Jody for a bit, and then besides that, just editing. And well, I know you're not really the biggest sports guy, but Jeremy Swayman, my favorite athlete ever, that played up at UMaine, the Boston Bruins goalie, we finally just signed him literally a day and a half before the season starts tomorrow, and we got him for 8 years now, so I'm pretty pumped. But besides that, just editing, man. How are you?
That doing great. Yeah, that sounds like some good news for you Bruins fans.
Yes. So, like I said, I'm so pumped, and my little brother just renewed his Bruins season tickets now, and I can actually go and support my team. So this is good stuff.
Heck yeah.
Yes. So tonight, my friend, I know because you are literally a wealth of knowledge, there is a very mysterious castle that I had mentioned to you that kind of ties hand in hand with some of these supposedly cursed books that we had also been speaking about, like the Lesser of Solomon, all kinds of things. And this mysterious castle is legit in the middle of an area that's not really accessible. I mean, there's no kitchen in there, there's no running water, nothing, and it's legit seemingly designed to quote unquote keep things in. And everyone that would be watching on guard would be focusing inwards. And you have all these dark entities that are supposedly reported from this area, and occult, all kinds of messed up stuff, which ties into basically what Dennis Carroll, a member of our science team, was saying is a lot of the werewolf occult. And he seems to think that's really how, quote unquote, a werewolf would be manifested through some of these books. And I obviously I'm not trying to curse myself, man. So I briefly heard others speak about what occurs in these books,
Mhm.
and apparently you can summon werewolves, you can summon vampires, winged entities, which could be things like the Jersey Devil, seemingly, and
Sure.
then you could speak apparently to angels, which I didn't realize that angels aren't really these nice looking things either. Those things look
No.
scary as heck from the real biblical times. And then you can apparently, on top of all that screwed up stuff, talk to Lilith and some of these lesser demons and even the good old toasty boy
Whoa, whoa,
himself.
whoa! Hold on, hold on. I wouldn't. I wouldn't. I'd be careful calling Lilith a lesser demon. She's actually supposed to be the mother of demons, so you don't want to piss her off at all.
Okay, well, sorry, thank you. Well, yeah, some of the person that was referring to that was saying, I guess, some of the lesser demons from the
Uh-huh.
toasty boy himself, I
Yep.
guess. But yeah,
Yeah, yeah. There's some interesting stuff. I mean, so I love knowledge. I love learning about stuff like this. At the same time, I'm like you, and I think you're pretty wise to have that attitude. Um, I'm not going to pull out a Ouija board. I'm not going to do a
nope,
séance. I'm not going to follow instructions from a 600-year-old grimoire or whatever. Not without
hell
someone
no.
I know and trust who knows the ropes and could show me the way, right? And since I don't know anyone like that, I'm not touching it. I believe that there are doorways and portals both in reality and in our bodies, and I don't want to accidentally open up something I'm not supposed to open up, something that was meant to stay shut to keep me protected. You know what I mean? So yeah,
Preach.
yeah, I think it's smart to be very cautious in our pursuit of knowledge.
Yeah, man. I mean, like you just said, some of that stuff is really interesting. And I happened to just be watching some historical stuff, and they were speaking about it and just showing some of, like the images and things, like you were saying, of like Lovecraft had created. And yeah, it was just some gnarly stuff. And apparently, one of those books that I had mentioned to you, there was only one copy, and this guy couldn't sell it. And somehow he finally did. And it was on the Titanic when it sank, too. Yeah, just some like really creepy stuff. Yet,
And the Titanic had so much weirdness going on too. Just dude, that's a whole other can of worms we should look into someday. Just there were so many very important, wealthy, famous people on that boat who didn't make it. It's makes you
right?
start to think.
And then a lot of these other books too that had been mentioned, they aren't even able to be translated by people as well, which
Hmm.
is even more creepy. And then some of them that have been remotely translated, there's spelling errors, which means that there's an even older version and that it's basically a depiction of that, which makes it even more mind-boggling. So as you stated, I just researched the Dogman, but I do understand werewolves and such fall into that category. And once I had heard about some of that, I was like, wait a second. I mean, that really could actually fall into the term werewolf right there if they're
Possibly.
legit. Yeah, if they're legit stating in these books you can summon things that look like that and that they're using those type of terminologies, it just made me think. And then back to that castle as to what was occurring there. I just figured, maybe we could tap into that and see what your thoughts are about all
Sure.
that.
Yeah, that castle's interesting. Looking at it on a map now, of course, a lot changes in like 800 or 900 years, however long it's been since it was built, right? But looking at this map of the area, there aren't any large built-up cities, right? There's just some small little villages. It looks like in the nearby. And traditionally, you build a castle in back in the old days, and this was built in the 1200s. You build a castle on a strategic point, usually to protect a city. Maybe it's to protect a trade route or some other strategic point. But generally, the castle is going to be someplace where enemy armies are going to want to move through, and it's there to block them. And I'm looking at this map, and my old geology brain is kicking in, and it looks a lot like Appalachia. I mean, it's just these rolling hills and river valleys, and um, it would not be a great place to move an army through. Basically, what I'm saying is nature is doing a lot of the protection here of the area. I don't think you'd need a castle there, so it's a weird place to build a castle, is what I'm trying to say. As if you're like a lord or a knight, for strategic value. So maybe there's some other reason why we got a castle in this location.
Right. And again, right there, no big villages or anything. And I believe it's called Castle Hauska or Huska. I
That
don't
sounds
know.
good to me. I don't speak Czech.
Yes, exactly. I can barely speak English properly. Yeah, like you said, it is obviously almost 1,000 years old, but it's just dang bizarre because, yeah, getting people there in general would be quote unquote a pain, and
Hmm.
attacking it would be a pain. Supplies would be a pain. Yet
Yep.
someone or people thought it was imperative to put up this castle there. And
Hmm.
it, as stated, is literally designed to quote unquote keep something in,
Yeah, it
seemingly.
seems believable. I mean, reading about it, it looks like, and actually looking at the satellite imagery I'm looking at right now, it looks like it, and in the description it says that it was built over a very deep hole, and that hole was, allegedly a portal or a pit to hell. So that is fascinating. You know,
Right
at
there,
least the
right?
yeah, at least the locals, back in the day, said that that was a pit to hell. So yeah, you build a castle around it. Yeah, and apparently, jumping ahead a little bit, or a lot, the forces of the Third Reich, we'll say that instead of some other words that may trigger the YouTube algorithm. They took over Czechoslovakia at the time, and apparently they had units stationed at this castle that were allegedly doing paranormal and supernatural experiments. The famous dictator of the early 20th century, he's well known to have done a lot of investigation and put a lot of effort into researching the occult and looking for ancient artifacts and locations of power and whatnot. This may have been one of them by all accounts.
Right. And a lot of people don't realize Heinrich Himmler, who was pretty much his second in command, more or
Hmm.
less,
Yep,
he was all about the occult, man. That dude, like,
absolutely.
I mean, even the other guy above him, the dirty stash or whatever you want to
Yeah,
call
yeah.
him, the white devil, whatever, either or, sure. Well, he was obviously into that as well, but people don't realize that Heinrich Himmler literally had a huge influence on the dirty stash, dude. Like,
Absolutely.
so a lot of the occult things that we would tie to the dirty stash actually came from Himmler. And
Yeah.
he, as far as I know, too, man, I think he was at that castle trying to quote unquote do things because he was also at another spot that was a church, kind of apparently, that was also built on another quote unquote portal to so and so, like to hell or whatever, to another realm. And it's very interesting again because previous, when that was built 1,000 years ago, was there any sort of war that was going on? And would you
Oh, I
think?
mean, there were lots of wars, right? About in that century, the political entity that would have owned that land would have been, well, actually more likely some duke or baron, some minor nobility, but he would have been underneath the Holy Roman Emperor. And the Holy Roman Empire was a pretty anemic, pretty weak, nation, if you will. I mean,
Mhm.
it was composed of all these smaller kingdoms and princedoms and dukedoms and whatnot, and they were always rebelling and fighting each other. And the emperor was basically an emperor in name only, had very little actual power, and you know the empire was never really able to project force outside of itself. But I mean, yeah, there was pretty much constant minor warfare, and probably a few major wars in the area at any given time, especially back then. But like I said, I mean, obviously things change, but it's a weird location to have a castle. There's some bigger towns to the southeast, that I'm sure have fortifications and castles, because they're a town, right? You're going to protect, the wherever the important people live, or the merchants, the industry. Um, but man, this Huska Castle, it's in the middle of a forest with rolling hills and river valleys. I, I don't know. It'd be interesting if someone had. I'll need to look up and see if the population shifted, if maybe there was strategic location or an important town that's disappeared in the last 800 years from that area. But once again, like, castles take money, right? You don't just build a castle for fun. You build it because it's an important place, and you need to keep some soldiers there, and they can go out from the castle and project force, and enforce the law or enforce the Lord's will. You don't just put a castle in the middle of the woods. It's strange, man.
Right, that's what I'm saying. And the reason I'd asked that about potentially the war is, I mean, we know nations enslave nations, but
Oh yeah.
would you need a castle really pointing inward and over this gigantic hole to enslave people?
Yeah, though that's the other thing. It's like, okay, so you built basically four walls, and it's over a pit. So usually the castle is like, it's some walls, and there's like a manor house where the lord or the
Hmm.
officer in charge of the area is living and, organizing things. That's where his troops stay. And this is just like four walls and a hole in the ground. And apparently, it's not very good for defensive purposes from the outside. Some people say that it was built to contain something on the inside. Maybe things that came out of this hole in the ground. That's
Well, that's when mentioning that area, I mean, people have reported seeing winged entities, which, as I mentioned to you, could that be something like the Jersey Devil? And
sure.
then
Yeah.
they hear strange voices down there in languages apparently that have not necessarily been spoken before.
Hmm.
And then you hear of things that are, dark, shadowy like entities and apparently werewolves and such. And it's gnarly because that all
Hmm.
kind of tied back with, the book, some of the books and stuff with all that. And obviously, if those books are someone and on the History Channel and other aspects are able to cover that, then you obviously know that Heinrich Himmler and his squad definitely had their hands on at least one of those books.
Oh, I'm sure they probably had all of them. I mean, the power of a very powerful nation at the time, and they started sending out explorers and investigators and researchers way before World War II kicked off. Back during the relatively peaceful period, and yeah, I'm sure they were all over the world collecting any and all of these ancient books that may have been able to unlock the secrets of the universe and give them an edge or whatever they were looking for. Yeah, I have no doubt about that. And you're absolutely right. I think the chancellor, I think he was more focused on running the nation and the war and all that
Hmm.
stuff. And his second in command was definitely he was the one who was really pushing the supernatural paranormal aspect.
Yeah, a lot of the human experimentation
Yep.
and stuff, and yeah, it's super gnarly. And then, like we were talking about, so Romania and Transylvania,
Yeah, they're not
in
too far away from there.
yes, and this is messed up. So, in the early 2000s, there was a village in Romania, a really small village up near the mountains, okay, that basically everyone left this village because they began losing pets, livestock, and
Oh, cool.
started apparently having something trying to take people as well. And they claimed they were these wolves with these strange glowing eyes,
Mm.
and they literally abandoned their town. Okay, and the reason they did is some of the quote unquote hunters followed this thing or these things back to where they believed they lived in a cave, and they found a ton of animal bones in there and what they thought maybe were human bones, and there was a ton of scratches all over the cave's walls and stuff. So they left. And what is also interesting, right around this time and a little bit later on is still the present day. In Vlad the Impaler's castle, right? People have reported seeing basically, is it a pack of dogmen or maybe werewolves that are living or dwelling in that
Oh
area?
yeah, Romania has some very strong wolfman, werewolf lore for sure, and yeah, people are seeing things there to this day. And the locals, it's not like the Dogman where you talk about Dogman here, and 99% of people think you're joking or you're insane. There, the locals, everyone, it's kind of just accepted. It's like, yeah, you don't go out at night by yourself or in the woods or whatever. Yeah, that's so kind of. I'm looking at image of this part of Europe on a satellite image of it, And it's interesting that there's this range of mountains that goes, it kind of makes a backward C shape through Romania, cuts through Ukraine, and then goes through the Czech Republic, including the area we're talking about. Now, what's interesting, the geologist in me, what's interesting about mountain ranges is they're formed at the same time, right? So you've got the Rocky Mountains in the United States, or the Appalachians. Everyone should be fairly familiar with either of those, and they were, that area of rock and earth was pushed up roughly at this in sequence. Whether you're talking about the Appalachians in Georgia or in Maine, where it was, that event was happening pretty much at the same time. And so what I'm seeing here is this range of mountains that would have been, it all would have happened from the same geologic event, the same plate activity. And what's interesting about mountains is they're made out of rocks. Now, this sounds like something that maybe one of our more vapid politicians might be saying, mountains are made out of rocks. But rocks are made out of crystals, okay? And I'm not talking about like giant crystals that you're going to turn into jewelry and say, oh, how pretty. If you look at any rock with a microscope, you will see crystals. Crystals are what form it. And crystals have a frequency. Okay, so a lot of people think that supernatural events have to do with a given frequency of energy, a given frequency of sound, a given frequency of light, but that it has to do with frequencies, especially like ghosts and paranormal type stuff. So if we're looking at this mountain range that goes through Romania, a land famous for the paranormal there, and it's cutting through this other part of Europe and going into Czech Republic, Czechia now, from that side of things, it makes a little bit of twisted logical sense that this area is quite unique and paranormal itself. Just what I'm spitting out right here, looking at this map, But yeah, that's pretty wild, pretty cool.
Right there. That is pretty gnarly and cool. And correct me if I'm wrong, that region, isn't that one of the older regions in Europe, Transylvania and like Romania?
Oh yeah. I mean, it's ancient. I mean, there's actually, ancient woods there, like old growth forests that were never, chopped down and turned into fields or anything. I mean, they've been there since, probably before the Roman Empire. You know what I mean? You're talking about some really old, fairly undisturbed areas of nature, and so old and undisturbed that the reason they're undisturbed is because the people who live there are pretty afraid of them. They're pretty creepy. They know that there's some wild stuff that happens there. So, yeah.
I know, right? And the forest in general obviously can be beautiful and creepy. I mean, if you were to walk into the forest in Maine, we are the most forested state in the whole United States. But like you were saying, then look at a forest in Europe. There's a big difference. It's just got like this creepy kind of appeal to it. Obviously not in all spots, but yeah, somewhere like the German forest.
Yeah, like the Black Forest in Germany, the Schwarzwald. Yeah, it's called the Black Forest because it is the trees are so tall and large that it's dark in there, right? It's significantly dark. So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about these old European forests, for sure.
It's so gnarly. And do you think that it's a little bit of both, or definitively that they've had interactions with these things? Do you think it's just because of the historical aspect of the werewolves and the witch trials that has been driven so hard into these people? Or do you think that they are definitely seeing something, or is it a misidentification? Because, I mean, they are these small rural villages, and I mean, they're not really up to date on things.
I think that may be why they are saying things, because they are these small, isolated rural villages, and it's kind of like why ancient people had more supernatural experiences, right? They didn't have people telling them that's impossible, that doesn't happen. I do think a lot of this stuff, the more you believe in something, the more power you give it. The more you believe in, say, magic, the more power it has. Same with like demons and ghosts. If you got poltergeist activity in your house and you're terrified that it can do some serious harm, you might be feeding it enough energy that it can do some serious harm.
Stuff.
Yeah, exactly. I think the Indian Veda texts call it a tulpa, a thought form. Basically, you get enough people believing in something, and I actually do think that humans are, for lack of a better word, psychic to a lesser extent. We just don't know how to use it. But you get enough of us thinking more or less the same thought and believing in more or less the same thing, and all of a sudden you got some real power, some real juice behind it. So I think that's a big part of it, and I also think along those same lines that what people believe is what kind of will be attracted to or manifested in a given area. So if say rural Chinese people believe in gnomes or dwarves or dragons or whatever their thing is, they're more likely to have encounters with that stuff. And if the Europeans believe in the fae, the fairies, and werewolves and trolls, they're more likely to have encounters with that stuff. That's just kind of more or less what I'm working with right here.
That is creepy as heck, and that makes a ton of sense right there. And I'm gonna toss you another question right here, because a lot of people that now, I guess that I've been a little bit revamped on my werewolf game here, okay? That apparently, yes, it could be a madman or a woman that's dove into the occult and has basically still the intellect of a person, but the rage now of a psycho inside of this crazy wolf demon, basically. And then now you have, say, the Dogman, which we've already, tapped on this numerous times, doesn't go back and forth, has nothing to do with the occult, has seemingly been around with ancient cultures, etc. Yet they fought in war against Herodotus with him as well. And
Mm-hmm.
also they reportedly understood sign language. They made their own weapons and things. So obviously we're not talking about dummies here, okay?
Right.
So basically the question I wanted to ask is, if it came down to more of a confrontation between both of them, or if you had to pick one that would be, I guess, maybe more responsible for some of the vicious attacks, do you think the Dogman would cut you more of a break than a werewolf? Whereas if you see a werewolf, you're toast. And who would win in the
Man, that's a hard question. It's like that old TV show where they pit a crocodile against a great white shark.
Yes,
Um,
hypothetical for sure.
geez, I'm thinking that the werewolf, especially if it's more of a spiritual entity, um, I'm thinking that's probably the more vicious, the more ruthless, the more likely to, destroy you, because it's probably more on the demonic side of things, versus the Dogman that may or may not, be demonic, but it seems to be more physical and exist in the physical world and kind of have to abide by the physical laws of
Yes.
nature. So.
No, exactly. That's kind of how I was feeling about it as well. But I mean, like I said, you are part of the science team. So whereas we're speaking about the topic, I just figured I would run that by you as well. Because, yeah, seemingly the Dogman most likely is going to cut you a break. Like if you see it, it cuts you a break. Whereas, like you said, if a demon and things, I don't really think they're cutting anybody breaks.
Yeah, not like, look, whether you're Christian or Muslim or Hindu or spiritual or whatever, um, most forms of spirituality believe that there are entities that we don't see and they're around us at all times. And they may be good entities, they may be bad entities, they may be neutral entities, but they're around us at all times. And obviously, in general, we're not being harmed and hurt directly by these things at all times, right? But if some occult ritual was done at Huska Castle and was able to give one of these entities a more corporeal form in the form of, say, a werewolf or whatever other things they're seeing out there, then yeah, that I think that'd be those things probably hate life, they probably hate humanity, and you give them the ability to reach out and touch someone, I think they're going to try and reach out and touch someone. So.
Preach, my friend. I couldn't definitely not state that any better right there. And before we tie this up, so do you think, obviously, we've already distinguished, again, big difference between skinwalkers, werewolves, and dogmen. That's not the aspect of the question. I was just wondering, the skinwalker, so obviously say they would not, Native American culture is much different than where all these books are oriented, but do you think to participate in quote unquote skinwalking, they would have had some version of their own Native American book or instructions that would have pretty
Yeah,
much been similar to this, you think?
I do. And in fact, in the old European tradition, to become a werewolf, they had to have the pelt of an animal, right? Pelt of a wolf, usually.
Hmm.
And they were, known to people, even their loved ones. Well, in the Native American tradition, same thing. They take the form of whatever animal's pelt they have, and they had to do horrible things. Most of the descriptions will say so horrible we won't describe them, but I mean it usually involved your family members. Aleister Crowley, he's a famous occultist. He basically preached that you had to do extremely obscene and debased things, and in doing so, you opened yourself up to the powers that you were seeking. Like you broke down those spiritual barriers that I was mentioning earlier when I talked about not wanting to mess with certain rituals. Um, and so basically that to me sounds like more or less what these dark shamans in the Native American culture are doing in order to get the powers that they supposedly have. So yeah, to me, there's a lot of parallels. There's a lot of parallels between the skinwalker rituals that we know about. Obviously, most of it's probably secret, and the old European werewolf rituals and lore. I think they're probably tapping into more or less the same natural energy, natural power. Whether they're German werewolves or Navajo skinwalkers. So.
Great answer right there. And so was Crowley a good guy, bad guy, neutral, or?
He was probably a bad guy. He was probably a really
Okay.
bad guy. Yeah, unless you just don't believe in any sort of morality, which obviously he didn't, then you wouldn't care. But yeah, a lot of the things he advocated and recommended people do in order to um, uh, practice the magic that he supposedly practiced would be very abhorrent to any civilized person.
Okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
I had heard that, but again, like I don't really dive too much into the occult, but I had heard that like that name and such. So it's definitely straight up bizarre. And a lot of people also don't realize, and I didn't really myself, about how again, the Nordics slash Viking cultures don't
Hmm.
really use the term skinwalker or werewolves, but man, do they mention that pretty hardcore too, dude.
So that's interesting. You bring that up. You got two different references in Norse culture. You've got the famous berserkers, which literally like means bear skins. Um, and they're the guys who are famous for like amping themselves up to the point of a frenzy and just tearing it up in battle. Beyond superhuman ability. Supposedly according to legends, and they would wear the pelt of a bear. And yeah, so some people think there was something going on there that might have been more than just like adrenaline and mushrooms. Might have been more on the magic side of things. And then also when you became an outlaw in Norse culture, you did something that just you couldn't be part of society any longer, but they weren't going to you. They would cast you out of the village, out of the nation, the tribe, whatever, if you will. And they referred to these as wolves in men's flesh, upright
Mhm.
wolves. And the idea was that you were essentially you had to live like a wolf out in the woods. You couldn't buy food at the local shop or whatever you needed. You were basically a barbarian. But it's an interesting term to use for a culture like that. Um, and of course that interpretation that I mean you were just an outcast, and it's how they referred to the outcast. That's from modern anthropology and the modern study of history. But if you're more conspiratorial and think that everyone's trying to hide the real history of the Earth from us, then you can just make up whatever you want and say, no, they were actually werewolves instead, which they might have been. I don't know, But I do take everything with a huge grain of salt, both from quote reliable sources and from more esoteric sources.
Preach. So do I, my friend, right there. But it is very mind boggling how the hell these completely separate cultures with honestly a very different belief systems all still have a common belief about this one thing. I mean,
Oh yeah, it shows up everywhere. I mean, it shows up in Middle Eastern lore. It shows up in Indian subcontinent. I mean,
Chinese cultures even mention it, man.
Exactly.
Like, what the
I wouldn't be
heck, dude?
surprised if the Aborigines in Australia talk about it. I haven't looked, but it wouldn't surprise me to find out. So they
Right?
certainly have their own Bigfoot. But
Yes, exactly. The Yowie. And again, before I let you go, Fenrir. Was that part of the Nordic
yeah,
gods?
yeah. Fenrir was one of Loki's children, and he just never stopped growing. And he was prophesied to one day grow so large he would consume the world, and that was essentially what would be Ragnarok, the final battle where the gods fought against Fenrir and the giants and the forces of chaos. So yeah, it's there's a lot of wolf references in Norse mythology, and in fact, interesting about Fenrir was in order to chain him and restrain him. See, he was chained and restrained, and supposedly still is. The gods had to trick him, and they, essentially said, "Hey, let us put this chain on you." And Fenrir could speak and said, "Only if one of you puts your hand in my mouth, and then if you don't remove the chains from me, I'll bite your hand off." That's kind of the insurance. And so Balder, he wasn't the god of war, but he was a pretty important son of Odin. Balder offered to do it, knowing full well what they were going to do, and they chained up Fenrir and then didn't let him go, and Balder lost his hand because of that. So
Wow. See, look at that right there. That's great stuff, man. Well, I appreciate you popping in again tonight. As always, there's just so many interesting aspects to that. And when I dove into some of this stuff, I was like, man, I got to talk to William about this because I feel like just the locations of these places and some of the historical aspects are going to intrigue him as well. So thanks again, man. I always appreciate sitting down with you. And even though I come in knowing something about a topic, I always leave learning a ton. So
yeah, well, now you're making me want to take a trip out to Eastern Europe. Like, I'm looking at these maps and these little villages, and man, I got to visit Czechia. I got to visit Romania. This looks awesome. So
thank you for everyone who once again stopped by tonight for this episode of Midnight Lycanthropy here on Star Fox Radio. If you do enjoy my content, please like, subscribe, comment, and share it. Feed the algorithm. And remember, the night loves us, and we love the night. The darkness is our new friend.